the thing that's put in hard and comes out soft, were the beans in the boiling water. That one had gotten a taste for spicy humor in prison. Our mood changed considerably when we were finally ushered into that dim, familiar hall. The men looked thinner, their eyes desperate in their pale faces. Between passings of the increased Guardia patrol, I tried to find out from Manolo what was going on. "It's over for us." Manolo clutched my hands. "You can't think like that. We'll be back in our little house before the year is up." But he insisted on goodbyes. He wanted me to know how deep was his love for me, what to say to the children, what kind of burial he wanted if I got a body, what kind of memorial service if I didn't. "Stop this," I said in an annoyed voice. My heart was in my mouth. On the drive home, we all wept, unable to console each other, for my sisters had heard the same grim news from Pedrito and Leandro. The men in their cells were being taken out at night in small groups and killed. The driver, a man about our age who had already driven us down twice, looked in his rearview mirror. "The butterflies are sad today," he noted. That made me sit up and dry my tears. The butterflies were not about to give up. We had suffered a setback, but we had not been beaten. In the long days that followed, we expected Peña to appear every morning with the horrible news. Now I was the one waiting out on the Galeria to intercept him if he came. I did not want anyone else to have to bear the first blow. Clearly, the tide had turned. The failed uprising plunged the whole country into despair again. At home, everyone walked around with the look of people at a funeral. "We cannot give up," I kept saying. They marveled at my self-control. And so did I. But by now in my life I should have known. Adversity was like a key in the lock for me. As I began to work to get our men out of prison, it was the old Minerva I set free. Saving the men. October. We could see them, chugging along behind us in their little Volkswagen. They would have a heyday reporting to Peña that we had visited another political. "Rufino," I said, "turn down Pasteur, quick." Rufino had become our favorite driver. Every time we rented from Burnigal, we asked for him. Ever since the trip home from our last visit to the prison, we had felt his unspoken allegiance to us. Just this morning, when Dede had worried about us leaving the house, Rufino had spoken up. "Adios, Doña Dede. You think I'll let anything happen to the butterflies? They'll have to kill me first." "And they will, too," she had muttered. He was peering into the rearview mirror. "We've lost them." I checked out the back window myself. Then I turned to my sisters as if to say, "See, you didn't believe me." "Maybe this'll be just the excuse they need." Mate was tearful. We had just come from seeing the men. Leandro and Manolo had been told they would be going on a little trip. What all the prisoners were told before they were killed. They were desperate, grim, taking the mill town we had smuggled into them, and still not sleeping. "They're in God's hands." Patria made the sign of the cross. "Now listen to me, you two. We have a good excuse." I reminded them. "Delia is a female doctor, and we have plenty of reason to see her." Neither Mate nor I had had a period for months. Delia was nervous as she led us into her small office, her eyes full of signals. Before I could say a thing, she held up her hand to her lips and gestured towards the wall where her diplomas hung. "We cannot talk here." "We came about our cycles," I began, searching the wall for the telltale little rod. Wherever it was, all the seam got at first, was an earful about our women problems. Delia relaxed, thinking that was truly why we were here, until I concluded a little too unmetaphorically, "So is there any activity in our old cells?" Delia gave me a piercing look. "The cells in your systems have atrophied and are dead," she said sharply. I must have looked stricken, for Delia's manner softened. "A few of them are still active, to be sure, but most importantly, new cells are filling in all the time. You need to give your bodies a rest. You should see menstrual activity by the beginning of next year." Next year! I reached for the prescription pad on her desk and wrote down Sina's name with a big question mark. "Gone. Asylum," she wrote back. So Sina had abandoned our struggle. But then I reminded myself, I had too, in effect, under house arrest for the last 2 months. I listed 6 more names of members I knew had been released. Then I watched Delia draw a line through each one. Finally I wrote, "Who's left in our area?" Delia bit her lip. Throughout our meeting, her manner had been guarded, as if we were being watched as well as bugged. Now she wrote down a name hurriedly, held it up for us to read, then tore all the used pages in half over and over again. She stood, eager to have us gone. The name Delia held up for us to see was unknown to us, a Dr. Pedro Viñas. When we got home, we asked Mama, who went through a whole family tree of Viñas, only to declare she didn't know this particular one. We grew suspicious, for a stranger in our midst probably meant a seam plant with a fabricated name. But Don Bernardo banished our doubts. Dr. Pedro Viñas was a urologist in Santiago, a very good one, who had attended Doña Belén several times. I called up and made an appointment for early next week. The woman's voice on the other end spoke to me as if I were a young child. "What is the little problem we're having?" I had to think what a urologist was for. The only doctors I knew were Delia, Dr. Lavandier, and the doctor in Montecristi who had delivered my babies. "Just a little problem," I said, stalling. "Oh, that," she said, and gave me a time. Permission from Peña was next. That was not going to be easy. The morning after our unauthorized detour, he appeared at the house. We could tell by the bang of his car door that we were in for it. For a full minute he shouted threats and obscenities at us. I sat on my hands as if they were extensions of my mouth. It took all my self-control not to order him and his filthy mouth out of our house. Finally, Peña calmed down enough to ask us what we had been up to. He was looking straight at me, for I was usually the one to do the talking. But we had already settled it among us. I was to keep my mouth shut, and Patria, his favorite, was to do the explaining. "We had to see the doctor about a private matter." "¡Qué mierda privado!" Peña's face was so red it looked ready to explode. Patria blushed at the obscenity. "We had to consult about some women's problems." "Why didn't you just ask my permission?" Peña was softening. By now, Patria had got him to sit down in a rocker and at least accept a glass of guanabana juice. "Good for the nerves, Mama," we said. "I wouldn't keep you from medical care, but you know very well." He looked straight at me. "That Delia Santos is on the political list. The rules clearly state no contact with politicals." "We weren't seeing her in her political capacity," I protested. Patria coughed, a reminder of our agreement. But once I got started, it was hard to shut me up. In fact, Captain, I'm glad to hear that you wouldn't stand in the way of our medical care. Yes, Patria swiftly cut in. You have been very kind to us. I could feel her eyes scouring me. I have been referred to Dr. Viñas in Santiago. And you would be very grateful for the captain's leniency in allowing you to go, Patria reminded me, embedding my request in her scold. Patria and Mate dropped me off in front of the small house on their way to El Gallo. A black Volkswagen was already parked across the street. It was hard to believe this was a doctor's office, but the sign in the window insisted. The lawn was overgrown, not in that neglected way that makes a place look shabby, but with nice abandon, as if to say, there's room in this house for everything, even a lot of grass. How Patria had managed this was beyond me. Mama always said Patria's sweetness could move mountains, and monsters, obviously. Not only had she gotten Peña to grant me permission for this visit, she had also secured a pass for herself and Mate to go shopping for supplies in the meanwhile. Our little dressmaking business was doing well. We were already working on November's orders, and here it was only the middle of October. We couldn't sleep nights, so we sewed. Sometimes Patria started a rosary, and we all joined in, stitching and praying so as not to let our minds roam. The genial little man who met me at the door seemed more like an uncle than a professional man or, Lord knows, a revolutionary. "We're having a little problem," he chuckled. Some chickens had gotten into the office from his house next door, and the maid was chasing them out with a broom. Dr. Viñas entered into the fun, teasing the maid to the delight of several small children who seemed to be his. He had gotten hold of some eggs and kept pulling them out of unlikely places. The children's ears, his own underarms, the boiler for his syringes. "Look what the hens left me," he said each time. His children screamed with delight. Finally, the hens were out of view, and the children were sent along with the maid to tell their mamita to bring over a cafecito for the señorita. The diminutives were killing me. Lord, I thought, so this is what we've come to? But the minute Dr. Viñas closed the door of his consulting room, he was a different man. Intent, serious, down to business. He seemed to know exactly who I was and why I had come. "This is an honor," he said, motioning for me to sit down. He turned on the raspy air conditioner. The place was not bugged, he was pretty sure, but just in case. We spoke in whispers. "The boys," I began. "We believe they're all about to be killed." I heard myself strangely demoting our men to the more helpless boys. Another diminutive, and from me. Dr. Viñas sighed. "We tried our best. The problem was getting the ingredients for the picnic." He looked at my face for a moment to see if I understood. "We were all set to go, the whole party assembled. But the gringos pulled out on their promise of pineapples. Some of the boys went ahead anyway." He made a gesture of broadcasting pamphlets. "Why did the gringos pull out?" I wanted to know. "They got cold feet, afraid we're all communists. They say they don't want another Fidel. They'd rather have a dozen Trujillos." I could feel dread rising in my chest. The men were not going to be saved after all. My old prison cough started up. Dr. Viñas reached for a thermos and poured me iced water in a glass cup that had measurement marks on the side. When my coughing had subsided, he went on. "The gringos are flirting with another group now." That was hopeful news. "The MPDs?" Dr. Viñas laughed, and briefly I saw the family doctor inside this toughened revolutionary. "No, they're idealists too, and all of us idealists are dirty communists.